How do you feel when you find out that the person you trusted the most is cheating on you? When your perfect life suddenly falls apart? I never thought I would find myself in this situation. But one day I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. And it changed me forever. Sometimes life seems so right and calm that you can't even imagine how everything can change in one day. Our relationship with Alia was exactly like that, as if from a book about perfect love. We met in a coffee shop near my office. Alia was always so stylish, confident, with a mysterious smile that immediately attracted attention. I hesitated for a long time before approaching her. But one morning I decided to take a chance. "Do you get a cinnamon latte here every day?" I asked her as she stood in line. She looked at me and laughed. "Yes, it's my weakness. Do you also like to repeat yourself with a black Americano?" This conversation was the beginning of something special. We started seeing each other more often. Morning coffees turned into walks after work, then dinners, and later we couldn't imagine our lives without each other. Alia was exactly the person I imagined next to me. She had a subtle sense of humor, knew how to support in difficult moments, and there was always a light in her eyes. She was not just a girl. She was my inspiration, my friend, my family. We started building our life together, moved to a small cozy apartment in the city center. Living together seemed so natural. We cooked dinners together, watched movies under the covers, planned trips. I thought that this is happiness. One day, after another perfect evening, I thought, maybe it's time to take the next step. I started choosing an engagement ring. I was overwhelmed by the anticipation of how happy she would be when I proposed to her. I couldn't even imagine that my perfect picture of happiness was hiding cracks that I simply didn't want to notice. When you're happy, you often don't notice the little things that signal problems. And when you do, you convince yourself that they're just coincidences. I did the same. But over time, these little things began to become too obvious. It all started with little things. Her phone was always on silent mode, although it hadn't been before. One day we were watching a movie and it vibrated. Alia quickly picked it up, looked at the screen for just a second and turned it off. "Who is it?" I asked, not giving it much importance. "Nothing important, just a work question," she answered, not even glancing in my direction. I didn't pay attention. I wanted to believe that this was a normal situation. But then there were even more such moments. She often stayed late at work, explaining this by deadlines. Her laptop was always closed, and when I got closer, she would sometimes change the subject of the conversation or close the tabs in her browser. I remember one time when she received a message while we were having dinner. Her face changed for a few seconds, a strange tension appeared on it. She didn't even respond to this message, she just quickly turned off the screen. "Did something happen?" I asked. No, everything is fine. Just work," she replied and immediately switched the conversation to another topic. At that moment, I had the first feeling that she was hiding something. But I told myself, don't be paranoid. She loves you and you know it. Trust is the foundation of a relationship. But what do you do when trust starts to waver? When do you notice that the person you love is perhaps not as open as before? One day I accidentally saw a message on her phone. It was from Ivan, the colleague. The text was simple: "Thank you for today. You are the best." I tried to stay calm. Maybe this is really a colleague? I thought. But something was bothering me. I asked her about this message. "Oh, it's just Ivan, he's working with us on a big project," she replied, smiling. Her voice sounded confident, but I noticed how she quickly put the phone in her pocket. "It's okay. I trust her," I told myself. But that was not true. My intuition screamed that something was wrong here. Then it got worse. She began to leave the house more often without explanation, saying that she needed time to herself. We used to always discuss our plans, but now she did it less and less. One evening I came home earlier than usual. The apartment was quiet, and only the sound of keys on her laptop indicated that Alia was working. I went into the kitchen and she quickly closed the laptop. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Oh, it's just work reports, nothing interesting," she replied, a little embarrassed. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. All these moments were forming a picture that I didn't want to see. But now I understood, something was definitely wrong. Trust is something that is easy to lose but very difficult to regain. I could no longer ignore my suspicions. I needed the truth even if it could destroy everything I valued. I decided that I had to find evidence. It was not easy because I didn't want to act behind her back. But I had no choice. One day when she left her laptop open, I decided to take a look. I knew it was wrong, but I needed to find answers. In her correspondence, I found several messages from Ivan. They weren't very frank, but each one hinted at something more than just a working relationship. "Thank you for that wonderful evening. I'm so glad you're in my life. I hope we can do it again next week. My heart sank. Everything fell into place. It wasn't paranoia. My suspicions were true. We all have moments when we have to face the truth. It always hurts, but at the same time it allows us to see the situation for what it is. My moment came that night. I sat on the couch for a long time, holding my phone in my hands, looking at these messages. A storm of emotions was raging inside me: anger, disappointment, pain. My hands were shaking, and I didn't know if I could even talk to her without screaming. When she got home, I didn't say anything right away. I waited for her to undress, make herself some tea, and sit next to me. She looked calm, as if nothing had happened. "Alya, we need to talk," I said. Her face tensed a little, but she tried to look calm. "What happened?" I put my phone on the table with the messages open. Her eyes widened at first, then she quickly looked away. "What does this mean?" I asked. My voice was shaking, but I tried to control myself. She was silent for a few seconds, then quietly replied, "It's not what you think. It's just friendly messages. Ivan is my colleague, we often talk about work." Her words didn't convince me. I pointed to specific messages that clearly went beyond work communication. She began to get confused in her excuses. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll tell you the truth. Yes, I had an affair. But it meant nothing. It was just, I don't even know how it happened. I never wanted to betray you. It was a mistake." Her words hit me like hammer blows to my heart. My head spun and I could barely breathe. "A mistake? How could this be a mistake? You knew exactly what you were doing?" I replied, my voice loud and filled with anger rising inside me. She started crying, but her tears didn't stop me. I needed to know the whole truth, every detail. She admitted that their relationship started a few months ago. At first, it was just innocent conversations, but then it went too far. She kept repeating that it was a mistake, that she loved me, not him. But her words felt hollow, empty. "How could you? We had a life together, plans for the future," I said. She didn't answer. Tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't look at her anymore. The next few days felt like hell. I couldn't eat, sleep, or work. My head was filled with questions. Why did she do it? What did I do wrong? I tried to find answers, but there weren't any. The truth was simple: it was her choice, and there was nothing I could do about it. Alya tried to fix things. She kept saying it would never happen again, that she was willing to do anything to earn my forgiveness. But I couldn't look at her without feeling pain anymore. A week later, I made the decision to leave. I packed my things and walked out of the apartment. It was hard, but I knew staying would mean living a lie. Betrayal is not just the loss of trust in another person. It's also the loss of a part of yourself. It makes you doubt everything: your feelings, your decisions, your ability to trust again. I thought a lot about how we ended up here. Maybe I wasn't the perfect partner. Maybe I failed to notice some of her needs. But even that didn't justify what she did. Betrayal taught me one thing: you can't control other people. You can only control how you respond to what happens. A few months passed before I finally felt ready to move forward. That experience changed me. I became more cautious in relationships, but I also realized how important it is not to keep pain bottled up inside. Alya reached out to me a few times after our breakup. She apologized and said she regretted everything. But I didn't respond. I knew that forgiveness wasn't about going back to the past, it was about letting go of the pain and moving on. Maybe you've also had moments in your life when you lost trust in someone. How did you cope with it? Share your story in the comments. Your words could help others find their own answers. When someone betrays you, the first thing you feel is shock. But after the shock comes anger, anger at the other person, anger at yourself, and even anger at life itself. For me, this stage was the hardest. After leaving our apartment, I moved into a rented one-bedroom flat. Everything felt foreign and unfamiliar: the look of the walls, the smell of the new furniture. But none of it brought me any relief. Every night, I lay in bed replaying the same thoughts over and over. I recalled every detail of our relationship, trying to pinpoint when things started to go wrong. She was always there, always smiling, always saying she loved me. How could that have been a lie? Anger became my constant companion. I was angry at her for destroying the world we had built. I was angry at myself for not noticing sooner. I was even angry at my friends who told me to move on, even though it felt impossible. During this time, I started avoiding people. Every conversation reminded me of Alya, of her betrayal, of what I no longer had. I felt trapped in my emotions, unable to find a way out. One day, you realize that you can no longer live in the prison of your emotions. This realization comes slowly, but it pushes you to take the first steps toward healing. For me, the first step was returning to my usual routines. I started spending more time at work, taking on additional projects to keep my mind occupied. It wasn't an easy decision, but it helped me distract myself, even if just a little. Next, I started going to the gym. It wasn't just a way to release my anger but also a chance to regain control over my body and my life. Each workout reminded me that I could be stronger than I ever thought. I also began reconnecting with friends. At first, it was difficult. I didn't want to face their sympathetic looks. But over time, I realized their support was honest and genuine, and it played a crucial role in helping me move forward. Betrayal is not just pain. It's an opportunity to understand who you truly are. And although it's far from easy, this path leads you to a new understanding of yourself. After several months of working on myself, I started noticing changes. I no longer woke up with a heavy heart. I no longer thought about Alia every minute. My anger gradually faded, making room for new thoughts. I began revisiting the things that had always brought me joy: reading, traveling, and music. I picked up my guitar, which I hadn't touched in years, and started playing again. These small things helped me find a sense of harmony. I also started writing. At first, it was just simple notes describing my feelings. But over time, those notes turned into stories. My pain found its reflection in words, and it became my therapy. Forgiveness isn't something you do for someone else. It's something you do for yourself to free yourself from the burden you carry inside. One day, I unexpectedly ran into Alia in the city. She was standing at a crosswalk waiting for the light to change. Our eyes met, and I could see that she looked just as unsettled as I felt. "Hi," I said. We only talked for a few minutes. She apologized again and said she regretted everything that had happened. I couldn't tell if her words were sincere, but for the first time, I realized that brief conversation was important for me. I understood that I could move on without the weight of the past holding me down. The past doesn't define us. It teaches us. And while betrayal left scars, it also gave me a new beginning. A year after our breakup, I met someone new. It was a completely different story. No rushing, no illusions, just the two of us building something real together. I came to understand that trust is something that can be rebuilt if you're willing to work on yourself and stay open to new possibilities. Betrayal is not the end. It's just a part of the journey we go through to become stronger. If you're going through something similar right now, remember, you're not alone. And you will overcome this. Share your story in the comments. Your words might help someone else find their own answers. Even when you think it's all behind you, the past sometimes returns. It appears unexpectedly, in dreams, in familiar places, in random words. And then you realize you haven't yet finished your internal battle. After that chance encounter with Alia, I started noticing how memories of our relationship began to fill my mind again. Not so much the pain, but rather a longing for what could have been. I thought about our shared moments, those evenings when we laughed and planned for the future. One day, I decided to return to the cafe where we first met. I sat at the same table, watching the people passing by, realizing that I was unconsciously looking for her in the crowd. But it wasn't out of longing for her, it was an attempt to finally let go of the past. When you leave behind what once broke you, it creates space for something new. But that space must be filled with the right things to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. I began pursuing something I had dreamed of for a long time but always put off: creative writing classes. I realized that words have the power not only to heal but also to open new horizons. My own story became the foundation for my first short stories, and I even worked up the courage to share them with my instructor. "There's truth in your words," he said. "People can always feel the authenticity of a story. Keep writing and you'll find your voice." Writing became more than just a way to overcome pain, it turned into a new passion. It was a process I could fully immerse myself in, losing track of time and space. Sometimes, new people enter your life unexpectedly, but they're the ones who help you realize that you're ready to move on. At one of the writers' meetups, I met Anna. She was an editor who helped authors discover their unique style. Her confidence and warmth immediately caught my attention. We started talking about books, art, and life. Anna was completely different from Alia. She didn't try to be perfect. Her authenticity and honesty struck a chord with me. I felt like I could be myself around her. No masks, no fears. Our conversation stretched on for hours. At first, it was just friendship, but gradually, a closeness developed between us that I hadn't felt in a long time. After betrayal, you think you'll never be able to trust again. But if someone is patient enough, you'll start rebuilding yourself step by step. With Anna, I was able to feel for the first time that trust is not just words, it's actions. She was always honest, even about the smallest things. That gave me the confidence to believe I could trust again. I shared my story with her. I told her about Alia, about how betrayal had broken me. Anna didn't interrupt or try to offer advice. She just listened, and that was exactly what I needed. Your past doesn't define you, she said. It only makes you stronger. My life didn't become perfect, but it became real. And that was more important than any illusion. Anna and I started building a life together, but this time I approached the relationship differently. I didn't strive for perfection or try to control every aspect. I was simply myself and accepted her for who she was. We supported each other in everything. She helped me with my writing and I encouraged her in her work. Our relationship was a partnership, where both of us were willing to listen and understand each other. Forgiveness is not always reconciliation with another person. Sometimes it's reconciliation with yourself. I realized I had forgiven Alia, not because she deserved it but because I needed it. I no longer wanted to carry that weight. I silently thanked her for the lesson she had taught me. Her betrayal helped me understand the importance of building a life on honesty and trust. We all make mistakes. Some are painful, some are destructive. But every mistake is an opportunity to change yourself. If you're going through a difficult time right now, know that this isn't the end. It's the beginning of a new chapter in your life. Maybe you'll never completely forget the pain. It becomes a part of you, a reminder of what you've been through and what you've learned. But you can learn to live with it, turning that pain into strength. Even as I started a new life, the past would occasionally resurface. It wasn't just memories of Alia but also lingering questions for myself. Did I do everything right? Could I have acted differently? One day I ran into a mutual acquaintance and learned that Alia had changed too. She left her job, moved to another city and was trying to start over. It made me reflect on how the betrayal had affected not just me but her as well. I realized that we were both victims of our choices. I was a victim of her betrayal and she was a victim of her own decisions. And while I no longer held resentment, I understood that this was a lesson we both had to learn. Every pain is an opportunity to look within yourself and discover what you hadn't noticed before. One evening I sat in my new home, flipping through old photo albums. I found pictures from the time when Alia and I were together. I looked at myself, happy, naive, confident that everything would be perfect. But now I saw more. I saw a person who didn't know how to listen. I saw someone who sometimes gave more attention to work than to the relationship. It was painful, but it was important to acknowledge my own shortcomings. A thought overwhelmed me: betrayal doesn't happen out of nowhere. It's a symptom of problems that have been building up for years. And while I didn't justify her actions, I understood that I wasn't flawless either. True forgiveness is not words. It's a process that takes place in your heart. I wrote Alia a letter. Not to rekindle our relationship, but to close that chapter of my life. I thanked her for the happy moments we shared and told her that I no longer held any resentment. After sending the letter, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't a step toward her, but a step toward myself. I no longer wanted to be a prisoner of the past. When you go through betrayal, you'll never be the same as before. But that doesn't mean you'll be weaker. It means you'll grow. 2 years passed since the breakup. I published my first book, a collection of stories inspired by my experiences. It received positive reviews and I was even invited to speak at a literary event. During my talk I said, "Life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about learning to go through it and becoming stronger. Betrayal, loss, disappointment, they're all part of our journey. And it's these moments that shape us. The most important thing is to keep moving forward, even when it feels like the end." I looked at the people in the audience and saw myself in their eyes, broken but filled with hope. After the event, a woman approached me and said, "Your story helped me. I've also been through betrayal, and your words gave me the strength to move on." At that moment, I realized my pain hadn't been in vain. It had become a source of strength, not only for me but for others as well. Life will never be perfect. But it will be real if you allow yourself to feel, love, lose, and start anew. If you're going through pain right now, remember, you're not alone. This story is mine, but it could also be yours. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might become a source of support for someone else. And remember, you're stronger than you think. I always thought I knew Maria better than anyone else. We had spent 20 years together, raised 2 wonderful children, and gone through both joyful moments and difficult times. To me, she was not just a wife but also my best friend, the person who was always there, who had no secrets. Or at least that's what I believed. It all began on an ordinary winter evening. I came home from work, immediately catching the scent of freshly baked pies and hearing Maria humming an old tune to herself. This was our routine, warm, familiar, almost perfect. But that evening, there was something unusual in her eyes. It seemed as though she was deep in thought about something important, but when I asked, she simply smiled and said everything was fine. Maria was a master at hiding her emotions when she wanted to. A few days later, I found her in the study, sorting through old photographs. She looked thoughtful, maybe even a little sad. Among the pictures, I noticed one I had never seen before. In it, Maria was very young, but she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a man I didn't recognize. "Who's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She flinched as if startled, quickly tucking the photo away. "Nobody," she replied, offering a slightly nervous smile. "Just an old acquaintance." That was the moment something shifted within me. I began to notice details I had previously ignored, how she would sometimes change the subject too quickly when we talked about her past, how she kept an old box of letters out of my reach, how, once in her sleep, she murmured a name I didn't know. 20 years of marriage, and suddenly, it felt like the person beside me was a stranger. Have you ever doubted whether you truly know the person closest to you? These thoughts gnawed at me, but I was afraid to ask more questions. Afraid of what I might uncover. The real blow came by accident. On our anniversary, I decided to surprise Maria. I was looking for her favorite brooch in her wardrobe, thinking it would complement the dress I had bought her perfectly. But I didn't find the brooch. At the bottom of a drawer, hidden among some papers, was an old diary. Its cracked cover revealed it had seen much over the years. Although I hesitated, I couldn't resist. Opening it, I plunged into Maria's past. A past that turned out to be completely different from what I had imagined. The entries were filled with pain and memories of events I had never known about. Her relationship with the man in the photo, her fears, her sacrifices, all of it was a shock to me. But the hardest part was understanding why she had kept it all a secret. I sat in our bedroom, holding the diary that revealed an entirely different Maria to me. The pages told of a past that had never surfaced in our conversations. Her entries began with tender, light-hearted words about her youth. She wrote about her dreams, her first steps toward independence, and her plans for the future. But then the tone shifted. Lines filled with fear, pain, and despair began to appear. One entry made me grip the diary so tightly that my fingers turned white. "I loved him like I've never loved anyone. But love turned out to be a trap. He took away my freedom, my faith in people, and a part of my soul I'll never get back." I read those words over and over, trying to imagine how Maria could have endured all of it. She wrote about a man who was once her everything but turned into someone who controlled her, stripping away her sense of self. His name was never mentioned, but from her descriptions, it was clear he had left a deep scar on her life. The further I read, the more I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. I discovered that before we met, she had been forced to hide. That man had stalked her even after their relationship ended. And only when she moved to another city did she manage to find some semblance of peace. On one of the last pages, I found entries written after she and I had met. "He helped me. He doesn't know, but every time he looks at me with his kind eyes, I believe the world can be safe. I haven't told him because I'm afraid he'll look at me differently. But how much longer can I keep this inside?" My heart broke. I was filled with anger, confusion, and overwhelming compassion all at once. Why hadn't she trusted me? I thought we shared everything. But now I understood just how deep the wounds could be that someone hides even from their closest loved one. That night I couldn't sleep. The diary lay beside me, its weight pressing down like the burden of everything Maria had been through. Do you know what it's like to discover that the person you love most has carried a pain their entire life, a pain you never even suspected? The next morning I decided I needed to talk to Maria. I needed to know the whole truth, even if it meant shattering our idea of a perfect marriage. "Maria," I began as she sat across from me at the kitchen table, "I found your diary." Her face turned pale and she froze, holding her cup of coffee. "You read it?" she asked, barely audible. I nodded. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" She lowered her gaze and I saw tears shimmering in her eyes. "Because I was afraid," she said, her voice trembling. "Afraid that you wouldn't understand. That it would change everything between us." We talked for hours. She told me how hard it had been to trust again after her trust had once brought her nothing but pain. She explained how she had tried to shield our marriage from the shadows of her past. That day I saw Maria in a new light, not as someone weak but as someone incredibly strong. She had walked through hell and had still managed to learn how to love again. But I also changed. I realized that true love is about accepting someone with all their wounds, even if those wounds can never fully heal. After that conversation, a strange silence settled between us. It wasn't a cold distance but rather a space for reflection. I tried to piece together all the fragments of her story, which now made sense. The sleepless nights, her seemingly irrational fears, the silent moments when her gaze drifted far beyond the room. I wanted to help her, but I didn't know how. In her eyes, I still saw the woman I had spent half my life with, but now I also saw someone else, a person I needed to get to know all over again. One evening, I took her hand and said, "You need to understand that to me you will always be Maria. Not a victim, not someone hiding in the shadows, but the woman I love. But now I know you've been through things I can't even begin to imagine. So I want to ask you, how can I help?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "You already have," she replied. "Just by not turning away from me." From that moment, everything began to change. For the first time, Maria allowed herself to speak about her past. It wasn't easy for either of us. Some of her stories cut through me like a knife, but I listened. I understood that this was my role, to be there even when the truth hurt. She told me how she met that man when she was just 19. He was older, charismatic, and seemed to own the world. At first, he surrounded her with care and a love she had never experienced before. But gradually that love became a trap. He isolated her from her friends and family, convincing her that only he knew what was best for her. It was like living in a golden cage, she said. He was both my paradise and my hell. When she finally decided to leave, it was a true rebellion. She left everything behind, even her own sense of self, and moved to another city to start over. But the fear that he might find her lingered for years. "And then you came into my life," she said, looking at me. "And for the first time in a long time, I believed I could trust again." Her words were both painful and healing for me. I couldn't change her past, but I could be a part of her future. Together, we decided she needed professional help. A therapist helped Maria confront the things she had buried deep inside herself. The process was difficult but necessary. Maria also made the decision to write a letter to that man. Not to reconnect, but to tell him that he no longer had power over her. She never sent the letter, but writing it became a form of liberation. That night, when she showed me the letter, I realized how much she had changed. She was no longer a woman hiding from her pain. She was a woman who had faced her fears head-on. Our marriage changed too. It became deeper, more honest. We began to talk more, to listen more. And while the shadows of her past would sometimes still surface, they no longer controlled our lives. One day, years later, she said, "You know, I'm grateful for everything that happened. Because if it hadn't, I would never have found you." I smiled, wrapping my arms around her, and replied, "And I'm grateful you were strong enough to share your past with me." We both understood that love isn't just about being there for the happy moments. It's also about staying through the dark times. Sometimes, the deepest connection is born when we share our most painful stories. That truth forever changed our lives. After Maria's past came to light, it felt as if our lives began moving in a new direction. I could sense that we were both changing. Her eyes, once filled with unspoken pain, now radiated confidence. I too found myself becoming more attentive to her, deeply appreciating the trust we were rebuilding from the ground up. One day we decided to renew our wedding vows. It wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a moment to promise each other honesty, openness, and strength, even in the face of pain. We chose a small church outside the city, one we had visited during one of our first trips together. Maria wore a simple white dress reminiscent of the one she wore on our wedding day. As I held her hand, I felt the weight of our past and the beauty of our present merge into one. "I promise to be by your side every single day," I said, looking into her eyes. "And I will never again let you feel alone." She smiled, and in her gaze I saw something new. It wasn't just love, it was trust, a trust forged from pain and acceptance. "I promise to be honest with you," she replied, "and never again hide what's truly in my heart." It was the most sincere and precious promise I had ever heard. Looking back, it feels like Maria and I began an entirely new life after her past came to light. It wasn't just a step forward, it was a leap into a new dimension of our existence. And though most people around us remained unaware of the change, we felt it in every detail, every glance, every word exchanged between us. One spring morning, as sunlight filled our home, I woke up to the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Maria was standing by the window, her silhouette merging with the soft light. On her face was a serene smile I had rarely seen before. "What are you thinking about?" I asked as I walked closer. She turned to me and replied, "About how good it feels to be here. To be home." Her words moved me deeply. Her idea of home now held a new meaning. It wasn't just the place where we lived, it was a space where she no longer hid from her past, a place where we were building something entirely new together. Later that day, as we talked over lunch, we reminisced about our family. The kids were grown, each carving out their own lives, yet they were still an integral part of our little world. We remembered them playing in the garden, their first days of school, and how they always asked why I looked at their mom as if I was seeing her for the first time. "They've grown into such wonderful people, haven't they?" Maria said, smiling. "They have," I agreed. "But they still come home. That means we did something right." An idea came to us then, to do something special for our family. We decided to plant a few trees in our garden. They would symbolize our family, roots that hold us together and branches reaching toward the sky, representing our dreams. That weekend when the kids came to visit, we shared our idea. At first they laughed, but then I saw a sparkle in their eyes. They genuinely loved the idea. We headed to the market to pick out saplings. Maria stopped by the apple trees, gazing at them for a long time, as if searching for the one that suited us best. "This is a tree of strength," she said, touching one of them gently. When we got home, the real fun began, planting the trees. Maria tied her hair back, put on gloves, and grabbed a shovel with such enthusiasm that our son couldn't resist joking. "Mom, are you planning to become a farmer?" She laughed with us, but there was something special in the way she moved. She wasn't just planting a tree, she was planting hope. When the first tree was firmly rooted in the soil, we all stopped to admire it. Our younger son asked, "What do you want us to remember when we look at it?" Maria paused, then said, "I want you to always know that no matter where you are, you'll always have a place where you're loved." Her words left a mark on my heart. After planting the trees, we had dinner together in the garden. It was a warm spring evening. The air smelled of soil and blossoms, and laughter and conversation filled the space around us. Looking at Maria, I realized how important it had been to go through everything we had to get to this point. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was fully part of our family in every sense of the word. That day became one of those memories that stay with you forever. A memory of how we weren't just planting trees but strengthening our roots, our love, and our faith in each other. Some time had passed since the day we planted the trees. Our lives had returned to a calm, everyday rhythm, and everything seemed peaceful. But a small twist of fate reminded us that the past always finds a way to leave its mark. It was an ordinary morning. Maria had gone for a walk in the park, and I decided to sort through some old things in the attic. After we had refreshed the garden and added some new furniture, it became clear that many of our old belongings were no longer needed. I sifted through boxes of old documents, children's toys, and photo albums. Then, amidst one of the piles of papers, I found a letter. Its yellowed, cracked envelope and uneven handwriting immediately caught my attention. It was addressed to Maria. I hesitated, unsure whether to open it, but eventually decided it was something she should choose how to handle. When Maria returned, I showed her the letter. She stopped in the doorway and I saw her face turn pale. She already knew who it was from before even opening it. "It's from him," she said quietly. We sat at the table and she slowly tore open the envelope. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were filled with resolve. The letter wasn't long. The man who had once broken her life wrote that he was sorry. He asked for forgiveness for everything he had done. He admitted he had realized his mistakes, but that it was far too late. I watched her as she read. Her expression shifted through a whirlwind of emotions: anger, pain, sadness, and finally, unexpectedly, something that resembled relief. "What are you feeling?" I asked. She placed the letter on the table and was silent for a long time. "I used to think I could never forgive him," she said at last. "But now, I don't want to carry this pain anymore. Forgiveness isn't for him, it's for me." She took a lighter, walked out to the yard, and burned the letter. We stood together, watching as the ashes rose into the air and scattered in the wind. It was a symbolic ending, one she had been waiting for her entire life. That evening we sat on the terrace, holding hands in silence. I could sense how deeply her thoughts had shifted. "He no longer has any power over me," she said softly. This moment marked a new chapter for us. The letter from the past didn't break her. Instead, it gave her the closure she had been seeking. I realized then that one of the most important things in life is learning to let go. To release pain, fear, resentment. To let go of what is behind us to make room for something new and beautiful. That night, Maria's smile was warmer than ever. It was the smile of someone who had finally freed herself from the burden she had carried for so many years. When Maria finally left her past behind, she felt a new strength awakening within her. The same woman who had spent years avoiding conversations about her pain was now ready to use her experiences to help others. One evening, as we sat in the living room over cups of tea, Maria suddenly shared a thought that had clearly been living in her heart for a long time. "You know," she said, "for so many years I was afraid to talk about what I went through. And now I think about how many women are going through the same thing with no one to turn to. Is that fair?" I looked at her and saw a newfound determination in her eyes. "You can make a difference," I replied. That's how the idea of creating a small support center for women who had experienced abuse was born. At first, it seemed like an almost impossible dream. We didn't have much money or influential connections. But Maria had something far more valuable: an incredible courage and an unshakable belief in the importance of her mission. She started small, by making phone calls. Online, she found forums where women shared their painful stories. At first, Maria simply wrote to them, offering moral support. Then she began calling those who were willing to talk, sharing her story with them in return. One day she returned from a walk with a box in her hands. "What's that?" I asked. "These are letters from women," she said. "They're thanking me for listening. Some even write about how they've started to change their lives." She opened the box, revealing dozens of letters written in different handwriting. Each one was filled with gratitude and hope. "This is just the beginning," she said with a smile. Gradually, her idea grew into a real project. We found a small space nearby that we could rent. It was old and in desperate need of repairs, but we both knew it was the perfect place to create something meaningful. Our kids came to help. Together, we painted the walls, brought in furniture from home, and accepted old sofas from neighbors. When everything was ready, Maria hung a sign above the door, "A gift of courage." The center began its work. Women in need of help came, knowing they would be heard and understood. Maria spent hours talking with them, offering support and helping them explore new possibilities. One day, a young woman named Alina came to us. She was only 22 but carried a weight on her shoulders that made it seem like she had lived several lifetimes. She sat across from Maria, too afraid to even lift her eyes. "I don't know what to do," she said in a quiet voice. Maria took her hand and said the words she herself had once needed to hear. "You are stronger than you think. And I will help you see that." We all watched as Alina began to transform. She started coming to the center every week, joined group sessions, and eventually began helping others. A few months later, she landed a job thanks to Maria's guidance. The day she first came to us, she couldn't even make eye contact. Now she stood tall, confident, smiling, and grateful for a second chance. Maria often said it was moments like these that gave her the strength to keep going. One day, as we sat in the garden under our trees, she said, "I never thought I'd find so much strength in myself. But do you know what's most important?" "What?" I asked. "Every woman I help gives me a piece of her strength in return. And now I know, everything that happened, all the pain, had a purpose, if it helps to change someone else's life." Her words were so full of conviction that I couldn't help but feel even more admiration for her. Maria had become a source of inspiration for so many, a person who proved, through her own example, that even from the deepest pain, something beautiful can grow. The following years became both a challenge and an incredible journey for us. Maria continued to develop her support center, which gradually transformed into a sanctuary where every woman could find help, and most importantly, regain faith in herself. Every day I watched Maria change. Her steps grew more confident, her voice steadier. She no longer avoided her reflection in the mirror as she used to. She had come to embrace herself fully, with all her struggles and triumphs. At the same time, we didn't neglect our personal lives. We decided it was time to fulfill one of our long-held dreams, a trip we had postponed for far too long. Maria had always dreamed of seeing the ocean. She often spoke about how, as a child, she imagined an endless expanse of water, waves whispering secrets, and a horizon that seemed unreachable. Although we lived far from the sea, her dream never faded. We started planning the trip, searching for a place where we could relax and recharge. When our children heard about it, they decided to surprise us by gifting us a week-long stay at a small cottage by the shore. When we arrived, Maria stood on the beach, gazing at the waves rolling onto the sand. She removed her shoes, stepped barefoot onto the wet sand and inhaled the salty air deeply. "This is even better than I imagined," she said, smiling. We spent our days walking along the coast, listening to the waves, and savoring the simplicity of each moment. One evening as we sat on the beach, Maria said, "You know, I think the ocean is the perfect metaphor for life. Sometimes it's turbulent, sometimes it's calm, but it's always beautiful in its unpredictability." I agreed. In that moment we both realized how far we had come together. We weren't just husband and wife, we were partners who had supported each other through the hardest times. When we returned home we felt renewed. That trip was more than a vacation, it was an opportunity to see our lives from a new perspective. Maria began pursuing another dream, writing a book. It was a collection of stories she had heard from the women at her center, interwoven with her own journey toward freedom and happiness. I remember her sitting at her desk late into the evenings, deep in thought. She would rewrite and edit her text, occasionally stopping to seek my advice or read a passage aloud. "Do you think this could help someone?" she would ask, looking at me. "I'm certain it will," I'd reply. When the book was finally finished, she sent it to a publisher. A few months later, she received a letter confirming that her work would be published. It was yet another triumph, another testament to how something beautiful can grow from even the darkest past. At her book launch, she was surrounded by people who came to thank her for her courage and inspiration. Among the guests was Alina, the young woman who had once been too afraid to look anyone in the eye. She approached Maria, embraced her tightly and said, "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been able to do this." Those words were the greatest reward for Maria. That evening as we returned home, she said, "I feel like I can do anything now." Her confidence and belief in herself had become integral to our lives. We began planning new projects, new dreams, and it brought us immense joy. Maria realized that the future isn't something distant. It begins today with every choice we make, with every step we take. Time flowed on, but I felt that each new day became something special for us. Maria continued her work at the support center, which was gradually transforming into a true haven of strength for countless women. What had started as a simple initiative had grown into a movement. Our home changed too. It was filled with the energy of people who came to us for support or just to share their successes. Many evenings we sat at the kitchen table talking about everything that had happened during the day. "You know," Maria said one night, gently placing her hand over mine, "sometimes I feel like we've turned our house into something more than just a place for the two of us." I smiled. "We've simply let it reflect who we are." One day, a woman who had once been too afraid to leave her home came to visit us. Her name was Svetlana, and she had worked with Maria for a long time to rebuild her faith in life. Now she stood on our doorstep, holding flowers and something wrapped in fabric. "This is for you," she said, handing us the gift. We unwrapped the fabric to reveal a small wooden sculpture, two figures standing side by side, holding hands. "I carved this," Svetlana explained, lowering her gaze. "It's you and Maria. Because you gave me the strength to start over." The moment was so moving that both of us nearly cried. "Thank you," Maria said, hugging her. "But you found that strength within yourself. We just supported you." The sculpture now holds a special place in our living room. It reminds us of how profoundly one person can impact another's life. We continued working on ourselves, our dreams, and what brought us together. It felt as though everything in our lives was coming together like a giant puzzle, with every piece falling perfectly into place. Maria decided it was time to expand the center. We found a new, larger, more comfortable space to welcome even more women. I helped her with paperwork and renovations, and our children once again pitched in to help set everything up. At the grand opening of the expanded center, Maria gave a speech. She stood before an audience of women, volunteers, and journalists, her voice steady and confident in a way I had never seen before. "This center isn't just a place for help," she said. "It's a space where every woman can find herself, her dreams, and her strength. And I know that together we can change more lives than we can imagine." After her speech, a group of young women approached Maria to sign up as volunteers. They said they had been inspired by her example and wanted to be part of the movement. On our way home that evening, I couldn't help but reflect on how much Maria had changed. She wasn't just my wife anymore, she was a role model for so many. At home, sitting by the fireplace, I asked her, "Maria, did you ever think this would all be possible?" She smiled, her expression thoughtful. Honestly, no. But now I believe that anything is possible. You just have to be willing to face the challenges, keep faith, and allow yourself to dream. Her words became a new lesson for me. We continued building our lives, unafraid of change and new challenges, because we knew that change makes us stronger. The last few years have been a time of great change and discovery for us. Maria not only transformed her own life but also touched the hearts of hundreds of others. Her support center grew, becoming a vital sanctuary for those seeking refuge and a fresh start. We found ourselves with more free time and decided to dedicate it to traveling, something we had postponed for far too long. Our first shared dream had been the ocean, but after fulfilling that, our desires expanded. Maria had always wanted to see the mountains, and this time I decided to make that dream come true. We traveled to the Carpathians, where nature welcomed us with its grandeur. We stayed in a small wooden cabin where each morning, we could sip coffee on the terrace while watching mist roll over the valleys. One day we decided to hike to one of the peaks. The trail was challenging, but every step felt meaningful. When we finally reached the summit, we were greeted by a view that defied words. Standing beside me, Maria took my hand and said, "This is the perfect place to reflect on everything we've been through." I looked at her and saw a woman who had grown stronger and more confident. Her smile now was different, genuine, free from the shadows of the pain it once hid. "Are you happy?" I asked. She turned to me and replied, "Happier than I ever imagined I could be." We stood there for a long time, silently soaking in the moment. This wasn't just a trip, it was a symbol of everything we had overcome and how we had found our place in the world. Returning home, we resumed our daily lives, but everything felt richer with new meaning. Maria continued writing. Her second book, which recounted the stories of women from the center, became a real success. She was invited to speak at conferences, appear on television, and even travel abroad. Yet, she always returned home to the little world we had built together. Our children became part of this story too. They helped expand the center, contributing their ideas and energy. I saw how inspired they were by Maria, how her strength passed on to them. One evening, as we shared dinner together, our son raised a glass and said, "To you, Mom and Dad. You're not just the best parents. You're an example of how to endure everything and come out stronger." Those words were the best gift we could have received. Life went on, and we knew there were still many unknowns ahead. But now we didn't fear the future. We had learned to cherish every moment, every small detail. Because happiness, after all, is made of those little things. One day, as we sat on the terrace in our garden, Maria said, "I'm no longer afraid of even my darkest memories. Because they helped me realize I'm stronger than I ever thought I was." I looked at her and replied, "You've always been strong. You just see it now." We laughed, watching the flowers bloom in our garden. The trees we had planted years ago had grown tall and sturdy, symbolizing our lives, our struggles, and our triumphs. Our story continued because true happiness isn't a destination, it's a journey. A journey where we learn about ourselves, support each other, and embrace change. Maria reached for my hand and I took it just as I had many years ago. "We made it," she said. "And we'll keep making it," I replied. Because love, faith, and strength are what keep us moving forward. Our lives continue, filled with small joys, mutual support, and the quiet happiness that follows the storm. We've learned to value not just the bright moments but also those that forced us to grow, change, and become stronger. If this story resonates with you or inspires you in any way, feel free to share your thoughts. Your feedback helps shape future stories that touch the heart and bring light to others.